Open a Dutch civil register from 1811 and one thing looks deceptively permanent. Surnames like Jansen, De Jong, De Vries, and Van Dijk. Names that now feel like old family emblems were, for many families, only just being fixed in ink. Those names seem to make a promise. De Vries sounds Frisian. Van Dijk appears to point toward a dike. Jansen looks like a paternal line stretching backward through one family. But DNA exposed the trap. Men with the same surname do not automatically share the same paternal origin. Some of the most familiar Dutch names were created independently, again and again, by families with no recent connection at all. The name can be accurate and still mislead you. Across these 15 surnames, the words preserve one layer of Dutch history. DNA exposes another. Which family lines connect, which do not, and how much older the ancestry beneath them really is. The first clue is hidden inside one of the most ordinary names on the list, Jansen. Jansen sounds like a family. Originally, it was a relationship, son of Jan. Peters worked the same way through Peter. Before fixed surnames became universal, labels like these could arise wherever a Jan or Peter had children. The families did not need to know each other or share a recent founder. They only needed the same naming logic. De Jong came by a different route. Its older meaning worked much like the younger or junior, a practical way to tell one namesake from an older one. Then a temporary description became permanent. The word stayed even after the original reason disappeared. Two Jansen families can carry exactly the same surname, while their paternal histories separate long before the name became fixed. Two De Jong lines can preserve the same word, even though the first younger person in each family had nothing to do with the other. Same spelling, completely different histories. That is why DNA can separate people. A surname seems to unite. But family-based names are the easy case. A name based on a place feels much harder to fake. And the next four names look almost like coordinates. Van Dijk can point to someone living by a dike or coming from a place built around the word Dijk. Vandenberg traces to a hill, a height, or a place name built around Berg. Vandermeer points toward a lake or a place associated with one. Then there is De Vries, literally a name identifying a Frisian, someone associated with Friesland. Now the surname seems to be doing exactly what people expect. It points directly to the map, but the map matters twice. Modern Dutch DNA still shows a strong regional pattern, and one of its most striking divisions runs near the great east-west waterways. The Rhine, Meuse, and Waal did more than shape towns and trade. Across long stretches of history, they also lined up with reduced movement between communities north and south of them. That matters because the same landscape was doing two jobs at once. It gave people labels, and it influenced who lived near whom, married whom, and moved where. Van Dijk does not give anyone a Dijk gene. De Vries does not make every bearer genetically Frisian, but the geography inside those names is not meaningless. The words remember the landscape. DNA remembers some of its consequences. And water did something else in the Netherlands. It did not just divide communities, it gave them work. An oven, fishing nets, and a forge. Three ordinary parts of a working settlement that survive inside Bakker, Visser, and Smit. Bakker is the baker, Visser the fisherman, and Smit the smith. These were useful jobs everywhere, which is exactly why they are dangerous names to treat like ancient clans. A village needed bread, river and coastal communities needed fishermen, and broken tools meant metal had to be worked. None of that required one founding family. So two men called Smit can carry the same name because their ancestors once did the same job, not because those ancestors were brothers. The same is true of Bakker and Visser. Again, the surname preserves something real. It preserves a role, not a biological origin. And the Dutch landscape sits behind these names too. Water meant fishing, transport, reclaimed land, trade, mills, and growing towns. The environment that separated some communities also created the occupations by which people recognized one another. But work was only one way a village created labels. A role, a physical description, or even a sign above a building could become just as permanent. The final 5 names show how far that could go. De Boer is almost brutally direct. The farmer. Mulder points to the miller. Meyer grew from the old title Meyer, used for an overseer or steward and related local roles. These names were not pointing toward distant tribes. They were pointing across the local economy. Then the system becomes even more intimate. De Groot, the Great, could distinguish someone by size or stature. Vos, meaning fox, has more than one route into a surname. It could be tied to a house or inn marked by a fox, or to a nickname associated with the animal, including red coloring or cleverness. By now, the pattern is hard to ignore. Names that sound like ancient bloodlines often began with things another person could see in ordinary life. Whose son you were, where you lived, what work you did, what role you held, even what nickname followed you around. Then those descriptions hardened into names that generations inherited. A label became an identity. All 15 names are now on the table. Their word origins are not the real mystery anymore. The real test is biological. If a surname often travels from father to son, and part of DNA does the same, should the two histories eventually lead to the same man? Sometimes they do. Sometimes the two histories split completely. The Y chromosome makes this test unusually direct. In a traditionally patrilineal family, a surname often passes from father to son, and so does the Y chromosome. Genuine paternal relatives can therefore leave 2 trails moving through the same generations, but the trails are not welded together. Research across Belgium and the Netherlands confirmed a real connection between surnames and Y DNA, but it also showed exactly how that connection breaks. A surname can be founded independently, changed, adopted, or passed along a different family route. One spelling, several paternal histories. De Vries makes the problem visible. As a word, it points to Friesland. Yet historical surname records show that De Vries, De Jong, and other common Dutch names were also adopted by multiple families when surnames were being formally fixed, including Jewish families choosing existing Dutch names. So the word can remain perfectly honest while the ancestry assumption fails. One De Vries line may run deep into Friesland. Another can reach the same surname by a very different path. DNA can help tell those paternal histories apart. And that is the limit of the surname. It can follow one family branch only so far. To understand the people underneath these names, we have to leave 1811 behind. Not by centuries, by thousands of years. Across much of prehistoric Europe, farming changed more than food. Populations related to early farmers expanded across the continent and mixed with local hunter-gatherers. In many regions, hunter-gatherer ancestry fell sharply. The Rhine-Meuse lowlands refused to follow that schedule. Ancient DNA from the Netherlands, Belgium, and Western Germany revealed communities in wetland, river, and coastal zones where roughly half of their ancestry still came from local hunter-gatherers, thousands of years after that ancestry had become far less prominent across much of Europe. The landscape mattered again. Wetlands rich in fish, game, and wild resources allowed older ways of life to persist beside farming communities. Farmer ancestry did enter these groups, but the change was unusually gradual. Then came an even stranger turn. When corded ware traditions reached parts of the Western Netherlands, some communities adopted the new pottery while carrying surprisingly little of the steppe-related ancestry associated with corded ware populations elsewhere. The pottery moved faster than the people. Later, the Bell Beaker period was different. Incoming corded ware-related groups mixed with local Rhine-Meuse communities, and the genetic landscape shifted much more strongly. The region was pulled into a demographic transformation that reached far beyond the Low Countries. Long before Jansen, Bakker, De Vries, or Van Dijk existed as fixed family names, the population history of the Low Countries had already passed through thousands of years of persistence, contact, and migration. The surnames arrived late. The ancestry did not. But if later Dutch history blended all those differences away, this would be nothing more than ancient history. Modern DNA says it was not erased so easily. The modern Netherlands is small, but genetically it is not as uniform as the map makes it look. Dutch DNA still shows a persistent north-south structure. Affinities toward Belgium become stronger in parts of the south and west. Affinities toward Germany change as you move toward the east. Even within provinces, regional differences can remain surprisingly visible. And once again, the rivers matter. The Rhine, Meuse, and Waal line up with one of the strongest historical boundaries in movement across the country. A political border can be redrawn in a generation. Geography works more slowly. The coast carries another trace. In northern and western populations, researchers found a small Danish-related signal whose timing overlaps the centuries of Viking contact around the North Sea. It is not a secret Viking gene, and it does not belong to a surname. But it is one page 5 more reminder that later arrivals left regional marks instead of repainting the entire country evenly. That is the deeper pattern. The Netherlands was never one perfectly uniform genetic block, waiting for surnames to be stamped onto it. Rivers limited movement, neighboring populations contributed, and coastal contact added another layer. Beneath all of that sits the much older Rhine-Meuse story revealed by ancient DNA. None of these layers belongs only to Jansen, De Vries, Smit, or any of the other names. Which brings us back to that register from 1811 and to what those names were actually recording. Open the register again. The ink has not changed, but the meaning has. Jansen is not one ancient clan. Van Dijk is not a genetic coordinate. De Vries is not a DNA certificate for Friesland. These 15 surnames came from Mikato's surprisingly ordinary things: family relationships, places, occupations, local roles, and descriptions, and many could arise more than once. DNA finally shows why that matters, because the people carrying the same name can belong to different paternal lines while sharing a much broader Dutch history shaped by rivers, neighboring regions, ancient persistence, and later migration. The surname is still valuable because it can preserve a real clue about one branch of your family at the moment that branch acquired its name. But that moment is only a snapshot. The ancestry beneath it is older than the register, older than the surname, and in many cases, older than the Netherlands itself. That is the real origin hidden behind these names. The surname is the label. The deeper family story was never contained in it. If one of these surnames is in your family, tell me the name and the province your oldest known Dutch ancestor came from. And if you want more stories where names, history, and DNA collide, subscribe for the next one.